I'm a 36-year-old woman, the oldest of 3 kids. My brother Percy is 34, and the youngest is our sister Molly, who is 28. Growing up, Percy and I had a pretty normal upbringing, but for some reason Molly was treated like a princess. I think it was because she was a bit of a surprise for our parents, being the youngest and all. She was always treated differently, which is probably why she grew up to be a spoiled brat. My dad tried to keep her in line and get her to behave, but my mum? No way. She never said a word against her dearest Molly, and wouldn't tolerate anyone else doing so either. Molly's behaviour was obnoxious, to say the least. Percy and I were significantly older than her, so until we were about 25, we just tried to ignore her remarks. Mind you, she said some pretty horrible stuff to us during her teenage years. She constantly made fun of our appearance, thinking she was the prettiest of us all. Annoyingly, she wasn't wrong. She did inherit our mother's good looks. But it wasn't just that. She mocked everything from the majors we chose in college to our careers. One Thanksgiving, we had a huge fight because she told Percy he would be an unemployed burden on the family just because he was a literature major. Another time, we didn't speak for weeks because she told me that my long work hours would leave me single and unattractive due to my eye bags. Molly is overly boisterous, egotistic, and constantly belittles everyone around her. Our mother always encouraged this behaviour, laughing off Molly's hurtful comments as jokes, even though it was clear Molly was serious. If we ever tried to retaliate, we were told we were being too sensitive. Molly had our mother wrapped around her finger, and we hated her for it. 8 years ago, after my father passed away, Percy and I started drifting apart from our mother and Molly. Despite favouring Molly, my dad was the glue that held the family together. Once he was gone, we didn't feel the need to visit Molly and our mother as often, especially during holidays. After his passing, we only saw them at family events hosted by others, occasionally on Thanksgiving, and maybe some Christmases if we felt like it. Honestly, we were better off because they didn't try to keep in touch either. My dad was well off, and so was my mother, so they had enough money to get by. Percy and I had also built our own lives, separately. It was like there was a wall between us, with Percy and me on one side and my mother and Molly on the other. Personally, I liked the wall. That's just how the relationship has been between the 4 of us. They shouldn't expect anything from me, and I don't expect anything from them. Recently, I learned that their situation might be a little different. A couple of weeks ago, I helped Percy with his medical bills after he fractured his ankle. His insurance only covered hospital bills, so I had to cover other expenses like medication, physiotherapy visits, and hiring a full-time nurse since he lives alone. He tried to convince me not to pay as he could afford it, but he was between jobs. I didn't want him to spend his savings until he established his online magazine, which was why he quit his teaching job. Besides, as the CFO of a company, money isn't a problem for me. I was glad to help my brother out. When my mother and Molly found out, they thought they could ask me for anything they wanted, like I was Santa Claus. That's why I'm in this situation now. I refused to help Molly buy her first apartment, which really pissed her and my mother off. 3 days ago, I got a random call from Molly while I was working. She told me she found an apartment she liked and wanted to buy it because at 28 it was embarrassing to still live with our mother. She needed my help to pay for the penthouse apartment since she could only manage half the price. It was bizarre because we hadn't had a proper conversation in 8 years, and our meetings were mostly out of obligation. Even then she found it hard to be nice to us. Now she thought I'd pay for her first apartment? For context, Molly is a freelance graphic designer, but she doesn't really do any work. She's never been to design school, doesn't have a degree, and making a couple of posters for our father's business that he didn't even use doesn't qualify her as a graphic designer. She claims to work with exclusive clients, but They're mostly family members who my mother forces to give her jobs. It's a hobby at best, not a job, so it's no surprise she's lived with our mother until now. I told her straight up that I wasn't going to help her. At 28, she could find a real job and pay for the apartment herself. She argued that I helped Percy with his medical expenses even though he had the money, but she didn't, and nobody was helping her. She said it was my duty as the oldest sibling to look after her. I told her the situation with Percy was different because he was between jobs and had a good relationship with me. That's not the case with her. I didn't say any of this to her. I just said no and hung up. She tried calling me a few more times, but I muted and ignored her for the rest of the day. When I got home, my mother called, and she was pissed, which wasn't unexpected since I knew saying no to Molly would make her mad. I was ready to fight, but she started by whining about how unfair everyone was being to poor Molly and that she didn't expect me to play favourites among my siblings. She told me Molly had finalised an apartment after a long search and needed help to buy it. Molly first asked our uncle, who runs the family business after my father's death. My dad had always planned for his brother to take over, which is why I chose a different path. Neither Percy nor Molly was interested in the business anyway. My dad's equity shares went to my mother after he passed, and she lives comfortably off that money. It's a successful company, but I guess my dad didn't anticipate Molly still living off their money. Molly's extravagant lifestyle has drained my mother's savings, so she was relying on me to help with the apartment. She said giving Molly the money now would make things easier in the future, because supporting her was getting harder. I told her that wasn't my problem. Molly should get a real job to afford the lifestyle she wants, or stay with her mother until she's 35. My mum got really mad and said I was ungrateful, arguing that I owed my success to their upbringing and should help my siblings. I didn't get her logic, so I told her my decision was final. She then threatened to go no contact with me. That didn't bother me since we've been pretty much low contact for the past 8 years. Her threat pissed me off. I told her that after Dad passed away, Percy and I accepted that things would be different because we knew she favoured Molly. She had no right to tell me it was unfair to play favourites among my siblings. I wasn't sorry about it. I told her she was free to go no contact because I was used to her treating us as if only Molly mattered. Percy and I have our own lives and don't owe anything to her or Molly. I felt relieved getting that off my chest. My mother yelled, saying she'd never speak to me again. I chuckled and told her that was fine with me and it meant I wouldn't have to invite her to my wedding. That caught her attention, but before she could ask about it, I hung up and blocked both her and Molly. So Molly was wrong. People do want to date career-driven, ambitious women. Otherwise, I wouldn't have found my boyfriend Jackson, who is 37, and we wouldn't have been together for almost 5 years. My mother and Molly have met him a few times, and he knows about our strained relationship. A couple of weeks ago, after we got engaged, we decided to have a small, private engagement party. We're getting married in a few months. I had thought about inviting my mother and Molly to the ceremony just to be nice, but now I don't feel it's necessary. Yesterday, Jackson received a message from my mother on social media. She told him that I had blocked her and Molly everywhere. She said she was incredibly disappointed in me and that since I showed her where she stood, she and Molly had decided to cut me off permanently. She hoped I was happy for ending whatever little family connection we had left. I don't understand why they're blaming me, but I feel bad about it. Am I the asshole for telling my mother I was fine with her cutting me off? Update 1. Hi everyone. Thank you so much for all the love and support in the comments. It made me realise that I was being emotional and didn't need to worry about my mother's feelings. They never worried about mine. I spoke to Percy about this, and he agreed with many of you that they were just trying to manipulate me. I didn't need to fall for it because I knew where I stood and had done the right thing. When Jackson and I discussed this, he mentioned that my mother and Molly seemed really hurt by my behaviour, which made me feel guilty. He hadn't said I should apologise, but I could tell he was struggling with the situation. Jackson is very close to his family, so it was hard for him to see things turn out like this. Whenever he met my mother and Molly, they were always on their best behaviour, so he didn't fully grasp how strained our relationship was. After I had Percy explain things to him, Jackson's opinion changed almost instantly. He said that if his parents had acted like mine, he would have cut them off without a second thought too. Now, all of us have blocked my mother and Molly. It finally feels good to sever ties after so long of pretending we were still a family. For as long as I can remember, my mother preferred Molly over Percy and me. Now we prefer our own peace of mind. I'm thankful this confrontation happened because it was much needed. Otherwise, we would have continued the pretense for the sake of others our entire lives. Update 2. It's been a week since I last spoke to my mother. After blocking her and Molly, Percy and I had no idea what was happening with them. This morning our uncle contacted us. He told me that my mother had decided to transfer half of her shares to Molly. He thought this was a terrible idea because Molly is incompetent and shouldn't have any control over the company. Our uncle explained that my mother was not only transferring shares but also demanding that Molly be given voting power in the company. This would be a problem for him as he is the one running the company. He didn't want to have this conversation with my mother because she was insistent, so he reached out to us for help. My mother had voting powers as a shareholder, but had always trusted my uncle's decisions. Now she was placing demands, and my uncle didn't want Molly to have any shares or power in company matters, since she lacked business acumen. Honestly, if I were in his position, I'd freak out too. Molly as a shareholder with voting power in my company? No way. After a brief discussion with Percy, we decided we couldn't let this happen. We had to visit our mother and talk to her in person. Our uncle had been desperate, and after our father passed, he had always looked out for us. He didn't deserve this kind of trouble. That's why we decided to interact with our mother again, despite vowing never to speak to her. When we arrived, Molly was there, which we knew would make the discussion more difficult. But we had made a promise, so we ignored her and went to our mother. We told her we heard from our uncle that she was demanding voting powers in the company for Molly. We were there to tell her it was a terrible idea. At first she ignored us, but we persisted, saying this was important. Finally she looked up and said we had no right to tell her what to do. After the way we treated her, she had no interest in speaking to us and wanted us to leave. Molly chimed in, saying that if she wanted to be an active participant in the company our dad built, we had no right to object, just because we didn't think it was valuable enough to get involved. I tried to stay calm and reason with our mother. I reminded her that our father didn't want any of us involved in the company and trusted his brother to handle it. I asked her to consider this, as going against it would disrespect Dad's wishes. This gave them pause, but Molly, realizing her chances were slipping, started a fight with me. She said I had already decided to cut them off, so I should leave before they called the cops. Percy told her to back off, and I continued reasoning with our mother. I reminded her that Dad had worked hard to build the company and trusted his brother to manage it. He didn't want any legal drama or family fights over it. I explained that's why I paved my own way in business. Molly had no business acumen and would have no idea what to do. I begged her to rethink this for the sake of our father and not disrespect his last wishes. Throughout this, Molly kept screaming that I was jealous and couldn't stand to see her happy. My mother stayed silent for a while, then finally told us all to shut up. She asked Percy and me to leave, saying she'd think about it and let our uncle know, but she found it very insulting that we had blocked her and wanted nothing to do with us. We were forced to leave, but Molly stayed. Percy and I are just praying that our mother changes her mind and doesn't demand that our uncle get Molly involved in the company. I spoke to Jackson about it, and he told me I did my best despite my bad relationship with my mother. Now, it's up to her. At least I can tell my uncle that I tried, and that should be enough. I've spoken to my uncle, and he's not too confident because we still haven't heard anything from our mother. But I'm keeping my fingers crossed that she changes her mind about Molly. Update 3. Hey, it's been 2 weeks. We recently found out from our uncle that, after much deliberation, our mother agreed that Molly doesn't deserve a say in how the company is run. My father had made it very clear that whatever his brother said goes, and if he said Molly hadn't earned her place, that should be respected. So she's not getting voting rights, but is getting preferred shares of the company. My mother transferred some of her shares to Molly, ensuring she has a stable income. I'm just thankful my dad's company won't suffer because of her. My mother and I still have no contact, and the same goes for Percy. Also, just for your information, our father didn't leave us any shares of the company, but that doesn't mean he left us nothing. Percy, Molly and I received other assets as inheritance. I didn't mention them because I didn't think they were relevant. My father may have been biased toward Molly, but he wasn't blind to her flaws, which is why we had a better relationship with him. Anyway, he's gone now, and I want to remember him fondly. I'm not saying he was perfect, so relax with the comments about making him out to be a saint. Update 4. Hey, it's been a couple of months and we've had 0 contact with my mother and Molly. We love it. It feels like all the toxicity has been removed from our lives. I'm happier than ever because I'm getting married in a week. The invitations went out about a month ago and, obviously, Molly and my mother didn't receive any. I didn't think they'd care, but some relatives told me that when they found out, they flipped out and asked everyone else not to attend. So far, most people have ignored them. It's amusing they thought this would work. It just became an excuse not to interact with them. My mother put up our old house for rent and moved into the penthouse apartment Molly had been raving about. This gave Molly an excuse to keep living with her mother, as she couldn't afford that apartment on her own. Molly spun it positively, portraying herself as the hero caring for her mother, and my mother played along as the grateful, helpless woman. Good for them, I guess. They would have made brilliant actresses and storytellers. Percy's magazine is doing well, and I hope he becomes even more successful. As for me, I'm getting married to the love of my life while managing a successful career. Everything Molly said turned out to be wrong,